Good evening, everybody. Hopefully what's showing is just my browser window. So let's take a look at a couple of demonstrations first and see if it helps establish a little bit about what we're talking about tonight. And as Charlie alluded to, the session is really on generative AI and focused on folks who teach with or about GIS. But by and large, we're gonna just sort of stick to the center of the road on this tonight because we expected to have a wide range of experiences and expertise walking into the webinar. Right now on screen, this is ChatGPT. This is actually ChatGPT Plus. So I'm paying for this one each month. We can talk a little bit about that later. You certainly don't need to. And in fact, you can get the same functionality through Microsoft for no cost, or very nearly the same functionality for no cost. So don't think this is a sales pitch. But ChatGPT is what's commonly referred to as a generative AI. It is a chatbot. And so it's designed to respond to text, at least traditionally. So we might just say something silly like hello world. And what you're seeing is ChatGPT giving us back some bit of text. Hello, how are you? How can I assist you? So it really wants to get to the point. So as educators, this generative AI can be very powerful for creating content at a very sort of technically simplistic level. We can generate text. And in our case, maybe we're interested in making a lesson plan. Maybe we're interested in writing a piece of text around a topic for students. Maybe we want to synthesize a chunk of metadata for an ArcGIS layer. Maybe you want to make a quiz. The systems like ChatGPT are capable of doing these things at a very basic level. And by that, I mean, that's where their functionality starts. It only gets better from there. A few caveats tonight as we start to jump into this. The generative AI technology, generally speaking, has really been publicly available, at least in the form that we're seeing it now, for really less than a year. ChatGPT became publicly available in November of 22, if I remember right. And it was really one of the first ones out of the gate. Now, if we look at it historically, computer scientists might say, well, yes, but the history of AI broadly, extends back decades, which is absolutely true. So it's not like this stuff just sprung up overnight, but thanks to computing power increasing, data and availability of data increasing, the explosion of what is commonly called a large language model occurred, and it allowed computer scientists to build essentially algorithms that are very good at predicting the next word in a phrase or statement. And it turns out being able to predict the next word is a very powerful skill, and it echoes patterns in our language. So the interesting thing, of course, is that these algorithms are built largely on data that was on the internet. So, for example, a lot of these chatbots, these large language models, have what they call cutoff dates. And ChatGPT, for example, explored and pulled data from the internet, in this particular case, up until January of 2022, which means that if we were to ask ChatGPT with no frills, no extensions, straight up ChatGPT about a current event, such as a conflict in the Middle East right now, it would have no knowledge, no understanding of it. What it could do is provide us some history prior to that period. So what we might do in by way of a demo. Let's see what I've got in my buffer here. I just pasted a request to ChatGPT. And you'll notice it's down here. Hopefully everybody can read it. Basically, what I say is I want a 16-minute lesson plan for middle school earth science. And I want you to link it to standards. And oh, by the way, why don't you go ahead and give me some form of an assessment here? And be sure to include the answers because I don't have time. So I'm going to go ahead and hit run. And ChatGPT is saying, well, certainly, let's start with what we know. So I'm going to scroll up here so it doesn't scroll right off the screen for us. It gives us the objective. And it looks like it's at least trying to tie it to next-gen science standards. Gives us a materials list. And then, of course, it's going to give us a lesson plan. We will make the presentation and these demos available to you after the fact. So if you can't read everything, don't sweat it. We'll share it back with you in a few minutes. So here's the quiz it generated for us. It gave us a multiple choice quiz, 10 items. Looks like 4 options per question. And there are our answers. So that looks interesting. Now, obviously, we're not taking a deep dive into picking it apart and looking to see how relevant it is or how accurate it is. With these models, remember, they're generally speaking, less than a year old. You absolutely want to review everything that's coming out of them and review them carefully. Generative models like ChatGPT or generative AI is not the same thing as a search engine. It is not running out, finding, say, a web page from USGS and recrafting it to try to match your request. It is literally using a model with an index of, in this case, I think it's 100 trillion parameters to provide back to you what should be a completely novel response, a completely new response. So the content that you're seeing should not be discoverable anywhere else on the internet. So if we drop this into a Google search engine, we should not find this anywhere. So it should be completely novel. This is good and bad. As instructors, it's interesting. It could be very, very powerful and save us a heck of a lot of time. Maybe what I want to do is describe the science content used in the previous lesson plan. Got to spell it correctly to my students in under 100 words. And I promise you, for those of you that have done all this, we won't do this all night. We're going to just take a quick shot, make sure everybody understands some of the basic capacities. So interesting, looks decent in our upcoming lesson, blah, blah, blah. And it's giving us a breakdown of the 3 boundary types. That's fascinating. Let's say rewrite the previous description using a Flash Kincaid grade readability of 7. And of course, that should force ChatGPT to rewrite the previous entry at a 7th grade 0-month readability scale. Now we could drop this into a Word or Grammarly and confirm it. I can tell you I've done it before. It usually does get pretty dang close, usually within a 10th of a period, a 10th of a grade band. So that's all very fun. Let's ask it to rewrite one more time, just for giggles. Rewrites the above description in Spanish. Not Spanish, Spanish. And we'll just hit return. I had Spanish in high school. I certainly don't trust my ability to read Spanish now. I'm sure some of you can. Um, but you'll notice that the large language models, the generative AI tools like ChatGPT are very flexible. And of course, we've just done some basic stuff here with respect to creating a lesson plan, creating an assessment, and creating a text description that you might use as a you know kind of a preamble for kids to read to help inform them of what's coming down the pipe. So I'm tempted. So ChatGPT is an option. I mentioned that I'm using a plus version, which is a paid version. Microsoft owns about half of OpenAI's ChatGPT. So if you go to Bing, bing.com, and you may need to be signed in, but you will notice that there is a link at the top of Bing, and it just says chat. And that will give you access to the exact same tool that we're using here. In fact, Bing's version is also able to use Bing search and does fuzzy the line between generative AI and search. But when used for good, it is in a very powerful way because first off, it gives you access to uh, uh, data that's far more recent than January of 2022. With ChatGPT, there's some plugins, including Browse with Bing, that you can enable and overcome that hurdle. So there's some ways around it. But as a general rule, that was designed, as my understanding, as a safety protocol uh, for for the early release of ChatGPT and other models. Um, which interestingly, those are being relaxed. Now, I'll show you one other demo very quickly before we kind of look at the slides. But these large language models can also produce what is generously called synthetic data. So we can ask for example, we might say, please list 10 cities in the Northern Hemisphere. And we're going to get a list. Let's see. New York, London, Paris, Tokyo, Moscow, Toronto. Those, I believe, are all Northern Hemisphere. Now, what we can try to do is say, list the above cities with recent population. And we'll see if ChatGPT throws a complaint at us. Oh, no, it's gonna go ahead and give them to us. List the above cities with population and latitude and longitude and format in a comma separated value style. Let's see if this works. And there it is. So now it's outputting it into a code box, which is actually nice for us. It might be a little harder for you to read because of the color it's used. See if I can highlight it, might help a little bit. But you'll see we've still got our city, we've got our approximate population, and then we've got an interesting lat long. So we now have a CSV, right? A simple one, but it's a point layer that we can copy the code for, drop it into a text editor, save it as CSV, and either upload it or drag and drop it into ArcGIS Online. And all of a sudden we have a feature layer ready to know. So this type of functionality, don't let me mislead you. In my opinion, this type of functionality, the data generation side of this, still feels very early. It still feels very young, and it's not terribly sophisticated. But you can do things like generate CSVs, obviously. You can generate KML, GeoJSON. So there are some flexibilities here. So with that, you can let your mind wander about possibilities. And the other thing I was going to show you. So before we jump into those slides, I'm at MapMaker. This is a new tool that is just released really over the summertime. Hopefully many of you have seen it or heard about it, but this is the MapMaker, esri.com/mapmaker. I'm going to just go to open layer, and all I've got on here is a base map. But when I open layer in MapMaker, you'll notice I've got a variety of layers that pop up, and each layer name has a little eye circle next to it. And if I click that eye circle, I get a very carefully written description about this data layer. And so, I'll bet you that if I can give ChatGPT 3 words or 4 words to build a lesson plan around, I'll bet you I can copy that whole description. So I just hit Control C or copy, Control C or Apple C. And I'll bet you, let's see, write an inquiry-based lesson around following content for middle school students. The lesson should take no more than, let's say, 30 minutes. So I'm going to hit the period button, and I'm just going to paste that metadata file straight into ChatGPT. I'm going to hit return. It just scrolled through our metadata, and of course, it's now outputting a sample activity specific to this Oregon Trail metadata that we just put into it. And you may be thinking, well, the metadata is not the data, and you're absolutely right. So again, we need to go back and check this. We might even say something like revise the above lesson plan to use an interactive digital map. And hopefully ChatGPT is going to, looks like it is, modify the activity with some tips and pointers about how we might use a web map that's featuring this data set. So the power here obviously is in the ability to very quickly generate a ton of at least at a surface level usable content, at least worth probably a quick exploration if you don't already have something that you want to use by way of a lesson or an assessment or even a data set. So with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and transition over to the slides. We're not going to just show you here with slides, but there are a couple things I want to point out to make sure that we get. Sorry, I've got my Zoom controls in the way. Let's see. Am I full screen, Charlie, or am I window?
You're pretty large, but you're not totally full screen.
I wonder.
So down bottom right, it looks like there's a full screen button a little farther to the right.
Yeah, those Zoom controls. If I go, let me just enlarge this.
That's pretty good.
And of course,
and we'll give people access to this at the end. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So we've already talked about what it is. We've already talked about, at least at a broad level, the idea that the search engine is not generative AI, that search engines return web pages that generally people have constructed, hopefully vetted. Generative AI builds new or novel responses. Generative AI, what we just saw was entirely text in, but you can also put in photography, video, databases, audio files. The type of media formats that can be put into these things is limitless right now, at least on the digital front. Generally speaking, generative AI tools are categorized based on what their input and output looks like. So if somebody's talking about a generative AI tool, they might say, oh, it's a text-to-text tool. Now, this is these designations are starting to sort of fall apart, but at least if you look on the net today, you'll still find these regularly used. So ChatGPT is a text-to-text large language model. Now, in addition to ChatGPT, I mentioned Bing has a version which is free. Google has a version called Bard, B-A-R-D, which is also free. Anthropic has one called Claude. Claude requires a sign up, but it's also free. So there are any number of places where you can access and use these things. They are essentially all generating very similar outputs, but they are also all a little bit different. So if you decide you really want to have it generate data, for example, you might take a close look at Bard. Bard is supposed to be better at generating code as well as data. I don't know that that's true, but these things are also changing very rapidly. They're evolving very rapidly. So where one particular LLM may be better 1 month for generating a data set, it may be that in 2 or 3 months, a different LLM is actually better. So up here in the left corner is this text-to-text category of generative AI tools. And you can see as you go sort of around the dial here, text to image is also very common. It's probably the second most common class of generative AI tools. Generally with this, the idea is that you say, computer, please give me a picture of a bird sitting on a telephone pole. And the software will generate the image. And it's not running over to, Flickr or Google Images and grabbing one that somebody took. It's actually generating a new image that is based on millions, billions of previous images and the algorithm that is able to mathematically rebuild, or rather build your requested image. In addition, of course, text to video, text to audio. The text to video is, I would say, the newest of those four. As you can imagine, it's probably technically more complex, but you can very much now type in, show me a video of a person walking on a beach at sunset with the tide going out, and you'll get something closely approximating it. Now, it may be more in the cartoony look than, say, a photorealistic, but again, these things are rapidly improving. So if you don't like your results this week, come back at the end of the semester and try it again. But then, of course, it's that idea of image to image, image to text, video to text. It's the manipulation of those media types both directions. I showed you text to data file, but you can also do text to code. And we probably won't spend any time looking at text to code tonight, but understand that ChatGPT, as well as Claude and Bard, all three are quite proficient at generating Python, JavaScript, R. Any of the more common scripting languages are very easy to get these tools to write for you. If you need some basic HTML or CSS or customizing a web application, that's also doable. This pocket of boxes over here on the right starts to touch on the hardware. So yes, indeed, wearables are beginning to emerge. Facebook Meta is making one, and there's a couple other new startups that have some. Oh, operating system integration is a thing. And of course, chips and NPUs. NPUs are the chips that are neural processing units. It's a fairly new style of chip, initially led by the graphics companies, but they are chips designed to optimize the production of generative AI processes. So ideally decreasing energy consumption, speeding up the output, so on and so forth. Benefits, challenges. I think, in the benefits side, we're beginning to see several of them here. Part of this is speed of production for educators, but from a student perspective, even just the text-to-text large language models, consider the case where you have a student sitting down and interacting with a chatbot through a specified set of content. Now, yeah, you could have them use ChatGPT, but good news, there are actually education-specific chatbots that are designed to help either remediate or advance student learning, to personalize it. There's some interesting possibilities there in terms of, I said remediate, but reinforced learning. Interesting possibilities there for personalized tutoring. On the challenges side, two things to be aware of, maybe three. There is bias. It's, these models are trained on human produced content. There's going to be bias. The content they're trained on is biased. How big is the bias? A bias, how significant is it? At that point, I would encourage you, if you're interested in it, do some searching. I wouldn't ask ChatGPT if she's biased or not. I'd ask Google search if what you see. There has been arguments made for copyright infringement because of the models were trained in some cases on copyrighted data. Thus far, to my knowledge, the courts have said that, computer generated output can't be copyrighted. That specific case, I think, was around a company that provided text to image, and the company, I believe it was the company, was arguing that the images outputted by their model were the copyright of that company and not the end user who had entered the prompt to generate the image. So courts have said no, in fact, you can't copyright a computer generated image in this case. So my suspicion is, at least for a while, we'll continue to see copyright becoming less of an issue. Lastly, be advised that these models are designed to improve. So every time you interact with it, theoretically, it's using your input, your interaction to improve the model, the model itself. Now, it may just be a little tiny improvement, and it's certainly not going to be pinned to you. So it is anonymous in that respect. And keep in mind, you're now one of, in the case of ChatGPT, probably trillions of data points that the models are trained on, but you are contributing to the improvement of the model. So when we take those categories and we begin to identify software or websites that can help people learn or use those types of AI models, our chart becomes a little more interesting. We're not going to go through all these, obviously. We'll give you the PowerPoint. If you're interested in a particular thing, you can hone in on an area. Many of these tools have a free or low cost sort of exploration phase. Some of them do cost a little bit of money. Most of them that have a price tag run $5 to $10 a month. So it's not a case where you're going to want to collect them all, but you might find some interesting stuff in there that is worth $10 a month. And again, remember, the large language models, the ChatGPTs, or at least the Bings, the Bards, the Claudes, they're free. And you can do a heck of a lot with those systems. Just want to highlight the wearables. These things are, as far as I know, not yet out, but some may. I think actually the pendant may be out by, it's either the pendant or the pin is going to be out, I think, by Christmas. The Meta sunglasses, I have not seen a release on those. But these wearables are the first generation wearables, and they're coming fast. Okay. So again, what we've done is taken the concept of generative AI tools that are built more or less for education, maybe K-12, maybe higher ed, and we've tried to categorize some of them by their input and output capacities. Um, Generally speaking, many of these are built as wrappers around the ChatGPT 4 engine, and the models are tailored or honed to specifically serve a task in education. Um, I will call your attention to Conmigo. My understanding is that Conmigo is now a part of Instructure for the Canvas system. So if your school or college is using Canvas, you may in fact already have access to Conmigo. Conmigo is a tutoring system, much like we were talking about a moment ago, based on GPT-4. So there are AI tools being implemented in varying levels and stages um, on your computer, on your devices, and soon to be on your wearables. You'll notice I mentioned earlier that the operating systems, especially on the Microsoft side, are getting embedded generative AI. Office tools, the 365 Copilot is being added to Microsoft Office. So if your district or college has a license to that software suite, you may very well be seeing it in the coming months. But again, feel free after the call to take a closer look at some of these tools. This list is changing, I would say, at least monthly. So there are some decent directories that you can look at online to give you a sort of a constantly updated view of what's available out there and what's usable for the classroom. We talked about the lesson plan and the data file. Some of you may know I have a particular affinity for text to image AI called Midjourney. Great for generating original map art, if you will, but you can also feed it an image. So in this case, I gave it this ArcGIS output, which is in the top of our slide, and the Midjourney output, the artistic output, is on the bottom. So for those of us that are really focused on analysis, maybe this isn't your cup of tea, but there is some interesting possibilities in that space. A variety of text prompts. We don't need to go through these. Generally speaking, the basis of the prompt is do this. Maybe create a lesson plan. And then from there, it's adding descriptors, honing it in so it knows what you want the lesson plan about, how long you want the lesson plan, what language you want it in, what standards you want it tied to. All of those attributes are optional. You can just say, give me a lesson plan for an 8th grade class. Maybe I want my sub to use it tomorrow. You can also provide context. You're a middle school science teacher. You work with 100 kids, and you can provide demographic information about the kids if it's relevant to the activity. You can tell them what the language breakdown is if it's relevant. So you can provide a rich context. You can also provide examples. So maybe not as relevant in a lesson plan case, but for example, if you wanted to generate a data set for you, maybe you want to give an example of how you want the data formatted. These things are all possible. You will generally get better responses from these large language models the more you give it by way of examples and conditions, but unnecessary. So I want to take just one moment and show you one particular AI tool, and this one's called HeyGen. And this tool is designed to take a photograph, take some text, and then turn it into a talking avatar. And I'm guessing by now most of you have seen this kind of thing. This is very cool for creating tutorials, especially when you don't want to have to reshoot video once a month or once a quarter as things change. You can provide the text and provide the talking head. And in this case, let's see if you can hear it. Charlie, you have to tell me if it's hearable.
地理信息系统 GIS 是一种创建、管理、分析和绘制各种类型
We
数
can
据。
hear it, but we can't understand it.
GIS 将数据与地图里
So the original video I created was in English. HeyGen will do that. Several sites will do that. DID, I think maybe even 11 Labs. The interesting thing about HeyGen and increasingly other sites is that there's also video translation. I don't know if you could tell it through our Zoom connection on my small screen, but not only did it convert the English to Mandarin, it actually manipulated the image of my mouth so that it didn't look like a cheap dub, but it actually altered my mouth so that it looked like I was speaking Mandarin. HeyGen, there you can use a couple samples with it for free, and I think it's like $10 a month if that's a path you want to go down. Again, several sites will do this kind of thing now. Some consortia that are available that are really focused on AI in education and K-12 education. And then looking at some of the ways that students are using it, we'll kind of gloss through that. You probably have a pretty good idea of the way your students are using it. And there's probably a wide variety of reactions. As you can probably guess, today, this month in the United States, there are districts and colleges that ban this type of software, and there are districts and colleges that fully embrace this kind of software. And without going into the good or bad of either, just pause and realize that your situation probably will vary quite differently from any other person's, at least in our webinar tonight. So as we move into Q&A, think about what it might be like if it were different, better or worse, in your particular setting. I think we can probably move through most of these notes. There's some additional links here that I find useful for folks. One of them is a CBS interview on AI that was just on like a week and a half ago. 10 minutes. It might scare you in terms of AI taking over the planet. Don't buy too much into the sensationalism yet. But it is an interesting video for background, a history of generative AI, and then of course, and then there's a podcast by an educator, a former biology teacher, talking about AI. So three extra points of reference for you.